It started with something small, something most people would have brushed off. A missing package, a delivery notification that never matched reality, a cardboard box that seemed to vanish between the front step and the doormat. For most homeowners, that would have been the end of it. Call the carrier, get a refund, move on. But for Sarah Jensen, it wasn't that simple, because it kept happening. Sarah had lived in the Willow Creek subdivision for 3 quiet years. It was the kind of neighborhood that advertised itself as peaceful and secure, complete with white fences, neatly trimmed lawns, and the ever-watchful oversight of the homeowners association. From the outside, it looked perfect, almost too perfect. But perfection, as Sarah would soon learn, has a price. The first package had been a simple one, a pair of shoes she ordered online. When it didn't show, she assumed it was a courier issue. The second time, it was a birthday gift for her niece, marked as delivered at 2:37 p.m., yet missing by the time Sarah got home from work at 3:10. She asked her neighbors, checked behind bushes, even peeked in her mailbox to see if it had been misplaced. Nothing. She shrugged it off, annoyed but still reasonable. Then it became a pattern. Over the course of 6 weeks, more deliveries vanished. Household goods, online purchases, even groceries left on her porch were gone before she could get to them. Every time, the tracking updates said the same thing, delivered. But the front porch was always empty. Sarah began to dread opening her phone to those notifications. Each buzz made her stomach tighten, knowing what she'd find, or rather, what she wouldn't. At first, she blamed the delivery services. Maybe her house number was too small to see. Maybe packages were going to the wrong address. But after a few calls to the courier companies, she learned the truth. Each driver had GPS-stamped confirmation photos showing the boxes right at her doorstep. The problem wasn't delivery. It was something else. Sarah began to notice small things that fell off. Footprints on her front path that didn't match hers. The faint click of motion sensor lights turning on late at night. Even her security doormat, a heavy one she rarely moved, seemed slightly out of place some mornings. Still, she couldn't prove anything. The HOA prided itself on keeping strangers out, so it had to be someone inside. And in Willow Creek, inside meant one of the homeowners. It was a strange, suffocating thought to realize that someone who waved hello at the mailbox or nodded politely at the community pool might be the one stealing from you. Sarah felt a creeping sense of paranoia take hold. She began to look at her neighbors differently. The elderly couple across the street, the family with the loud kids, the young man who always wore headphones during his runs. Any of them could be the thief. When she finally brought it up at the monthly HOA meeting, the response was dismissive. The HOA president, Marlene Turner, had smiled tightly, her red lipstick perfectly even, her voice sweet but condescending. She had said something about keeping track of deliveries more carefully and suggested that Sarah might want to consider a lockbox. Then she quickly changed the topic to lawn maintenance and parking violations. The meeting moved on, but Sarah didn't. Something in Marlene's tone, her insistence that the HOA bore no responsibility, rubbed her the wrong way. Marlene had been the president for nearly 6 years, a self-appointed guardian of neighborhood order. Her word was law, and she made sure everyone knew it. She inspected driveways, fined residents for unapproved paint colors, and even once reprimanded a homeowner for leaving Halloween decorations up past November. Everyone respected her, or at least pretended to. After that meeting, Sarah's suspicions deepened. The HOA had access to community security feeds, the ones placed near the entrances and walking paths. If anyone could have seen who was taking her packages, it would have been Marlene or the HOA board. But when Sarah asked to review the footage, she was told the cameras weren't pointed toward private property. Convenient. It was the final straw. Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. That weekend, she bought 2 small motion-activated cameras, one disguised as a porch light bulb, the other hidden inside a potted plant near her front door. She angled them just right, covering every inch of the entryway. She didn't tell anyone, not even her closest neighbor. This time, if the thief came back, there'd be no escaping the truth. Days passed quietly at first. A week went by with no deliveries, no strange noises, no reason to check the footage. Then, one Thursday afternoon, her phone pinged with a delivery alert. Package delivered at 3:09 p.m. Perfect timing. Sarah was at work, but her cameras were ready. When she returned home an hour later, her front porch was empty again. Her hands shook as she unlocked her door, half dreading what she might find on the camera playback. She loaded the footage on her laptop, scrubbing through the timestamps until she reached 3:09 p.m. There it was, the delivery driver placing a box neatly on her doorstep, adjusting it, and walking away. 10 minutes later, the motion sensor triggered again. The image that appeared next froze Sarah's blood cold. It wasn't a random thief. It wasn't a stranger. It was Marlene Turner, the HOA president, walking briskly up Sarah's porch, glancing around, then casually picking up the package as if it were her own. No hesitation, no shame. She tucked it under her arm, looked straight toward the camera for a brief second, then walked away. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind spinning. Every missing package, every smug response at the meetings, every excuse. It all made sense now. The woman who lectured everyone about community values was the one stealing from them. But Sarah wasn't going to react. Not yet. Not until she had everything she needed. She rewound the footage, saved it to a USB drive, and set up the cameras again. Because one video wasn't enough. She needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that would expose Marlene completely. If Marlene had been stealing from her, chances were she'd done it to others too. The next few days were a blur of tension. Sarah acted normal, attending HOA events, exchanging polite nods with Marlene, all while her hidden cameras kept recording. Each night, she reviewed the footage, waiting for another visit. It didn't take long. On the third day, another package vanished. And once again, Marlene appeared on camera, this time in the early evening, wearing sunglasses despite the dim light, carrying a clipboard to look official. She approached like she was on HOA business, then repeated the same act, grab, glance, go. By the end of the week, Sarah had hours of footage, timestamps, and tracking logs. The HOA president was a thief. And now, Sarah had the power to expose her. But she also knew she had to be careful. Marlene wasn't just a neighbor. She controlled the board, the rules, even the community's communication channels. If Sarah made one wrong move, the story could be buried, twisted, or used against her. She needed a plan, a way to bring Marlene down publicly, without giving her a chance to hide behind excuses or fake apologies. And as Sarah lay awake that night, the glow of her phone illuminating her face, she realized the truth. This wasn't just about stolen packages anymore. It was about taking back her home from the person who claimed to protect it. Sarah didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marlene's face flickering on the camera screen. The neat bob of her hair, the forced calm of her expression, the casual arrogance with which she stole what wasn't hers. The image haunted her, not just because it proved who the thief was, but because of what it meant. If Marlene, the woman who practically was the HOA, was stealing from her neighbors, what else was happening behind closed doors? By morning, Sarah had made up her mind. She wasn't going to act impulsively. Not yet. She needed to understand the bigger picture, the motives, the methods, and the full extent of Marlene's reach. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an investigation. Her first step was quiet observation. She started keeping track of delivery times, both hers and those of her neighbors. She noticed patterns. Packages that arrived in the late afternoon, especially those left unattended until dusk, were far more likely to disappear. When she casually mentioned the issue to a few residents, they shrugged it off, assuming porch pirates had somehow slipped through the gated entrance. But when Sarah asked who else had lost packages, she started hearing the same names over and over. The same homeowners who had recently received citations or fines from the HOA for minor infractions, improper trash bin placement, faded shutters, unauthorized plants. It clicked slowly at first, then all at once. Marlene wasn't stealing at random. She was targeting homeowners who challenged her authority or failed to obey her endless stream of HOA guidelines. Every missing delivery was another act of quiet punishment, disguised as coincidence. Sarah's realization sent a chill through her. This wasn't just petty theft, it was control. She decided to dig deeper into how the HOA actually worked. Officially, the association was supposed to operate transparently, with open records available to any resident upon request. But when Sarah visited the HOA office, a converted storage room at the community clubhouse, she was met with cold resistance. The board secretary, a frail man named Leonard, refused to share financial statements without a formal request through the president. The president, always Marlene. Sarah thanked him politely and left, but inside, she was furious. The more she looked into it, the more the entire HOA began to look like a personal fiefdom. Marlene had built a web of loyalty and fear. Most residents were too intimidated to question her, afraid of being fined, embarrassed, or dragged into the next community scandal. Others simply didn't care enough to fight back. Sarah wasn't one of them. That night, she went back to her recordings. Frame by frame, she analyzed Marlene's movements. She noticed the same car parked a few houses down during each theft, a silver SUV with HOA parking decals. It was the same vehicle Marlene drove to every board meeting. The timestamps matched the missing package reports from at least 3 other residents. It was all there, the evidence, the pattern, the arrogance. Sarah made multiple backups of the videos and stored them in different locations. Her laptop, a cloud drive, and a portable hard disk hidden under her couch. She wasn't going to risk losing it. The next step was to figure out how to use it. Public exposure was risky. If she went straight to the police, Marlene could deny everything, claim it was a misunderstanding, or accuse Sarah of tampering with the footage. The HOA's lawyer would defend her instantly. But if Sarah waited too long, Marlene might catch on that she was being watched. Then came an unexpected opportunity. The HOA newsletter, something Sarah usually deleted without reading, announced the upcoming annual homeowners meeting. It was the one day of the year when all members could vote on board positions and raise community concerns in an open forum. Marlene always treated it as her personal victory lap, boasting about the HOA's achievements while silencing anyone who dared speak against her. This time, Sarah planned to let her speak, then destroy her credibility in front of everyone. She began preparing. She printed screenshots, time-stamped delivery logs, and even outlined a timeline of thefts tied directly to HOA activities. The more she assembled, the stronger her case became. But she still needed one last thing, confirmation that other homeowners had been targeted. So she started knocking on doors. Some were hesitant to talk, worried about retaliation. But once Sarah showed them snippets of her footage, Marlene's unmistakable figure on her porch, they began to open up. One elderly woman admitted her medication shipments had vanished multiple times. A young couple said their tools had been missing for months. Another neighbor confessed they'd once seen Marlene near their porch late at night, but assumed she was inspecting landscaping. The evidence wasn't just stacking, it was overflowing. Still, Sarah felt uneasy. As the days passed and the meeting approached, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Once, she returned home to find her trash bin knocked over, its contents scattered across the driveway. Another time, a letter was slipped under her door and signed, but typed in a clipped, formal tone, warning her to be careful about spreading false accusations. She recognized the style. It was exactly how Marlene wrote her HOA violation notices. Sarah didn't flinch. She doubled down. If anything, the intimidation confirmed she was on the right track. On the night before the meeting, she made her final preparations. The footage was compiled into a short video, 3 clear clips showing Marlene stealing packages, each one labeled with the exact date and time. Sarah loaded the file onto a flash drive, tucked it safely in her pocket, and rehearsed what she would say. She imagined the scene vividly. The crowded community hall, the shocked gasps, the moment Marlene's mask finally cracked. For the first time, Sarah felt not fear, but power. Yet as she turned off the lights and got into bed, a new thought crept into her mind. If Marlene was bold enough to steal packages and confident enough to threaten residents, what would she do when she realized someone had evidence against her? Sarah pushed the thought aside, convincing herself that the truth was protection enough. But outside her window, parked under a dim streetlight, the silver SUV sat quietly for hours. The next morning it was gone, and so was the potted plant that had hidden one of Sarah's cameras. She rushed outside, her heart pounding. The stand was overturned, soil scattered across the porch, the camera missing. She checked the other device, the porch light camera, but its memory card had been removed. Marlene knew. Somehow, some way, she'd found out. But what Marlene didn't know was that Sarah still had backups, multiple copies of the footage she could use. Still, the message was clear. The game had turned dangerous. As evening fell and the community gathered for the annual meeting, Sarah took a deep breath and walked into the clubhouse, clutching her flash drive tightly in her hand. Every eye turned to her as she entered. Marlene stood at the front of the room, smiling that same controlled, confident smile, her hands folded neatly on the podium. The meeting began. The speeches started. Everything seemed normal, until Sarah raised her hand. The annual HOA meeting was always a spectacle of order and control, precisely the kind that Marlene Turner thrived on. Folding chairs arranged in perfect rows, a long table at the front draped in white cloth, and a podium where she stood like a monarch addressing her subjects. The residents of Willow Creek filled the clubhouse, murmuring quietly, some clutching their annual due statements, others just curious to see who would be reprimanded this time. Marlene, as always, started the night with her signature poise. Her voice carried a tone of authority, calm, deliberate, and laced with self-importance. She spoke about community improvements, landscaping budgets, and the ongoing effort to maintain the quality and integrity of Willow Creek. People nodded. Some clapped. It was all rehearsed, predictable, the same every year. But not tonight. Sarah sat in the third row, hands folded in her lap, her flash drive hidden safely in the inner pocket of her purse. She listened quietly, her heart pounding with each word Marlene spoke. The confidence in Marlene's tone, the smug tilt of her chin, it made Sarah's stomach churn. But under that growing rage was a calm, focused determination. This was the moment she had been preparing for. When Marlene finished her lengthy monologue and opened the floor for community concerns, there was the usual silence. No one ever dared speak first. That was how Marlene maintained her power, through quiet intimidation. But then, Sarah raised her hand. The room turned. It was a small movement, but it carried weight. Murmurs spread through the crowd as Marlene's expression froze for a split second before softening back into her polished smile. "Go ahead," she said, her tone polite but tight. Sarah stood up slowly, her voice steady though her pulse raced. She began by talking about the missing deliveries, a problem that had been plaguing several homeowners for months. A few people nodded, whispering to each other, clearly having experienced the same issue. Marlene, however, kept her face perfectly neutral. Sarah continued, carefully building her case. She mentioned the reports she'd gathered, the times, the tracking data, all matching up in a pattern that couldn't be coincidence. The room grew quieter as she spoke, tension tightening like a wire. Then, finally, she reached in her purse. "I thought there might be some confusion about what was really happening," she said evenly, pulling out the flash drive. "So I installed security cameras." For the first time all night, Marlene's mask slipped. It was brief, a tightening of her lips, a quick dart of her eyes toward the board members, but it was enough. Sarah handed the flash drive to Leonard, the HOA secretary, who fumbled nervously with the projector. After a few seconds, the screen at the front of the room came to life. The grainy black and white footage began to play. Gasps rippled through the audience. There, clear as day, was the HOA president herself, walking briskly onto Sarah's porch, glancing around, and stealing the package. Her posture was unmistakable, her signature red jacket and silver SUV visible in the background. Then the second clip played, then the third. Each one painted the same damning picture. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marlene stood completely still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For a long, heavy moment, she didn't speak. The residents turned in their seats, staring between her and the screen. The air was charged, disbelief, anger, shock, all swirling together. When Marlene finally did speak, Her tone was soft, controlled, almost patronizing. She said something about taking packages into safekeeping for residents who travel frequently. It was a flimsy lie, and everyone knew it. The murmurs turned to open disbelief. Someone in the back scoffed loudly. Another resident muttered, "That's not what it looks like." The board members avoided eye contact with her. Leonard, the secretary, had turned pale. But Sarah wasn't done. She presented timestamps, tracking confirmations, and statement from other residents whose deliveries had gone missing under the same circumstances. Each piece fit together perfectly, a timeline of deceit stretching back months, possibly years. Marlene tried to interject, but Sarah kept speaking, calm and deliberate. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth was doing the work for her. As the evidence piled up, Marlene's confidence crumbled. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, began to shake. She called the footage doctored, demanded it be deleted, and threatened legal action. But no one was listening anymore. What struck the residents most wasn't just the theft, it was the hypocrisy. The woman who fined people for leaving their bins out too long, who cited them for violating community standards, had been secretly stealing from them under the guise of authority. When Sarah finished, she stepped back and let the silence speak for itself. Then, quietly but firmly, a voice from the back of the room broke through. "I lost my medication 3 times this year," the elderly woman said. "You told me it was probably the mail carrier." Then another voice. "My tools went missing too." And another. "My son's birthday gift never showed." The room erupted. Voices rose. People stood, and the once orderly meeting descended into chaos. Marlene tried to regain control, banging her gavel, shouting for silence, but her authority was gone. No one was afraid of her anymore. Within minutes, several residents began calling for her resignation. Others demanded a police report be filed. The board members looked to one another helplessly, uncertain what to do. Sarah watched it all quietly, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from release. After weeks of suspicion, fear, and manipulation, the truth was finally out in the open. Eventually, Marlene left the podium, her face pale and rigid, ignoring the shouts that followed her out the door. The silver SUV screeched out of the parking lot moments later, leaving a stunned silence behind. The rest of the meeting was chaos. Residents crowded around Sarah, thanking her, asking for copies of the footage, telling their own stories. Leonard finally called the meeting to an early close, promising an emergency session to handle the situation. But everyone knew it was over. Marlene's reign of control had just collapsed in front of the entire neighborhood. Sarah walked home that night under the cold glow of the streetlights, exhaustion mixing with satisfaction. It was done, or at least she thought it was. She'd exposed Marlene, and the community had finally seen her for what she truly was. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe. But deep down, she couldn't shake one thought. People like Marlene didn't just disappear quietly. They fought back, even when cornered. Especially then. And when Sarah reached her porch, she noticed something odd, a faint glimmer of broken glass near the front steps. Her potted plant lay shattered again, soil scattered across the pavement. Only this time, there was a note sitting on top of it, typed neatly. No signature. The note sat there in the dirt, crisp and deliberate. A single sheet of paper resting on the shattered remains of the plant Marlene had already stolen once. The words were typed neatly, without smudges or errors. There was no signature, no name, no indication of who had left it. But Sarah didn't need one. She knew exactly where it came from. Her heart pounded as she crouched to pick it up, the wind rustling through the trees like a whisper. The message was simple, but its meaning was unmistakable. Marlene wasn't gone. She was angry. The rest of the neighborhood might have thought the matter was over. After all, the meeting had been a public humiliation, the kind of downfall that would send any reasonable person into hiding. But Marlene Turner wasn't reasonable. Her pride was as rigid as the rules she enforced. Sarah knew the woman wouldn't go quietly. Still, she couldn't help but hope that maybe, just maybe, it would end there. That Marlene would resign, move away, and leave Willow Creek in peace. But by morning, those hopes were shattered. The first sign of retaliation came in the form of paperwork. A thick, official-looking envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside was a notice of violation. Her fence, it said, was 2 inches above community height regulations. There was another citation for improper porch lighting and yet another for unsanctioned landscaping changes. 3 violations in total, all carrying hefty fines. Sarah laughed bitterly. It was almost comical, the pettiness, the precision. She could see Marlene's hand in every line. It was an attempt to reassert control, a last desperate reach for power. But also made one thing clear. The fight was far from over. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Her garbage bins were mysteriously overturned every morning. The HOA bulletin board outside the clubhouse displayed a new anonymous letter warning residents about dishonest individuals spreading lies for personal gain. A few neighbors who had previously supported Sarah suddenly became distant, unwilling to make eye contact. It was psychological warfare, subtle, deniable, effective. Sarah tried to keep calm. She documented everything, every notice, every message, every odd occurrence. If Marlene wanted a war of attrition, she'd get one. But what Sarah didn't realize was that the battle was already being fought on another front, one she couldn't see. Rumors began to spread. Online posts appeared on the neighborhood social forum, accusing Sarah of doctoring her footage to frame Marlene out of spite. Fake screenshots circulated, implying Sarah had a history of disputes with the HOA. Even her employer received an anonymous email claiming she was involved in a neighborhood scandal. It was relentless, calculated, the work of someone who knew exactly how to ruin reputations. Sarah tried to fight back with the truth. She shared her footage publicly again, showing the timestamps and evidence. But Marlene's allies, the quiet few who owed her favors, who feared her wrath, began to muddy the waters. They framed Sarah as vindictive, claiming she had staged the incidents to embarrass the HOA. By the end of the week, the once supportive neighbors were split down the middle. Some still believed her. Others whispered behind closed doors. The HOA board called for an emergency internal review, claiming it was to maintain fairness and transparency. But Sarah knew the real purpose, to buy Marlene time. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah returned home from work to find her driveway blocked by a silver SUV. It sat there idling, headlights off, engine humming. The sight froze her in place. She recognized it instantly. The same SUV from her footage, from Marlene's porch visits, from the nights she'd parked under Sarah's window. Her first instinct was fear. But as she approached cautiously, the SUV suddenly reversed, screeching down the street before vanishing into the night. She managed to catch a glimpse of the license plate, but it was covered with a black plastic shield. When she checked her porch, she found something even worse. Her mailbox had been ripped open, its contents scattered across the walkway. Most of it was junk mail and old flyers, but one envelope was missing, a letter she'd sent to the HOA board containing copies of her evidence. The message was clear. Marlene was removing every trace of Sarah's accusations before they could reach official hands. That night, Sarah sat in her living room, lights off, staring out the window. She felt the isolation creeping in, the fear that no one was truly on her side. The HOA was a fortress built on loyalty and fear, and Marlene had ruled it long enough to make sure no one crossed her twice. But Sarah wasn't the same woman she'd been when the first package disappeared. She was smarter now, cautious and relentless. If Marlene wanted to fight dirty, Sarah would fight smarter. The next morning, Sarah filed a formal police report. She handed over the video evidence, the threatening note, and the records of property damage. The officer who took her statement seemed skeptical at first. Neighborhood drama, he called it, but once he saw the footage, his tone changed. He promised to look into it, though Sarah could tell the case wouldn't be a priority. She realized then that justice wouldn't come through the usual channels. So she created her own. Sarah reached out to a local news reporter known for covering community corruption stories. She sent a brief, anonymous email, attaching the footage, the HOA notices, and the note. Within hours, the reporter replied. They wanted an interview. It was a risk. Going public meant losing anonymity, exposing herself to more retaliation. But it also meant breaking Marlene's power once and for all. As she prepared for the interview, another letter appeared on her doorstep. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, shaky, and uneven. It read, "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with." There was no signature again. But this time, something else was attached, a photo. It was a picture of Sarah's house, taken from across the street at night. The blinds were half open. She could see her own silhouette through the window. For the first time, Sarah felt true fear. This wasn't just about stolen packages anymore. It was about control, intimidation, and perhaps something even darker. She called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the note was gone. Someone had come back for it. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light outside, made her jump. The once quiet neighborhood now felt like a stage where something sinister was unfolding just out of sight. But even as fear gnawed at her, one thought burned brighter than ever. She wasn't backing down. Not now. If Marlene wanted a war, Sarah would make sure the world was watching. The morning after the photograph appeared, Willow Creek felt different. The neighborhood that once seemed polished and peaceful now carried an undercurrent of tension that no one wanted to acknowledge. Lawns were still trimmed, porches swept, and flags fluttered neatly in the wind. But the illusion had cracked. Behind closed doors, everyone was whispering. By then, Sarah's story had reached beyond a gated community. The reporter she'd contacted, an investigative journalist named Dana Lowe, had responded faster than expected. Dana specialized in exposing small-town corruption, from fraudulent landlords to crooked city officials. When she saw the footage of Marlene stealing packages, she knew it was more than a petty theft story. It was a glimpse into the rot beneath suburban perfection. 2 days later, the first article went live. HOA president accused of package theft and intimidation tactics. It included screenshots from the footage, excerpts from HOA notices, and anonymous quotes from several residents. The story spread quickly, first among local readers, then across social media. People were fascinated. The idea that a neighborhood's own enforcer was secretly a thief made for irresistible drama. But the fallout inside Willow Creek was immediate and brutal. The HOA board scrambled to contain the damage. Leonard, the secretary, issued a formal statement claiming the board was deeply troubled by recent allegations and promising a full internal review. It was an attempt to distance themselves from Marlene without admitting complicity. But everyone knew they'd turned a blind eye for years. Meanwhile, Marlene vanished from public view. Her car was gone, her blinds stayed drawn, and no one saw her at the clubhouse. But the damage she'd caused didn't vanish with her. The HOA meetings were suspended indefinitely. Maintenance projects were delayed. Residents stopped paying dues, demanding to know where their money had gone. Rumors circulated that Marlene had embezzled funds long before she was caught stealing packages. Some claimed she'd been funneling HOA money into personal expenses, luxury vacations, new furniture, even home renovations. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The community's trust had been shattered. Sarah watched it all unfold from the sidelines, both relieved and unsettled. She hadn't wanted to destroy the neighborhood, only to expose the truth. But now, the HOA was crumbling, and with it, the sense of order that had once defined Willow Creek. The local news cameras arrived next. Satellite trucks lined the street as reporters interviewed residents in front of freshly painted fences and carefully arranged flower beds. Everyone had an opinion, but few wanted to be recorded on camera. They feared being associated with Marlene, or worse, becoming her next target if she decided to fight back. And then she did. 3 days after the article went viral, Marlene reappeared on television. She gave an exclusive interview to a different news outlet, sitting in what looked like her own living room. Calm and composed, she claimed the videos had been heavily edited and taken out of context. She portrayed herself as the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled resident with a personal vendetta. She didn't name Sarah directly, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. By evening, Sarah's inbox was flooded with messages. Some were supportive. Others were filled with venom. Anonymous emails calling her a liar, a troublemaker, even a criminal. One simply said, "You'll regret this." The police, under pressure from the media, finally began taking the case seriously. They subpoenaed HOA financial records and interviewed multiple residents. The tone had shifted from disbelief to suspicion. What started as petty theft was turning into something much bigger. But Sarah's life was rapidly unraveling in other ways. At work, her manager called her into the office to discuss the public controversy. Her colleagues had found the news story, and HR was concerned about potential reputational risk. They offered her time off to handle the situation. It wasn't punishment, but it felt like exile. At home, things grew worse. Late at night, Sarah would hear the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel outside her house. Once she looked out the window and saw a shadow standing at the edge of her yard, still, silent, watching. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had vanished. The next morning, someone had spray-painted a single word across her garage door in bold red letters. Snitch. That was the breaking point. Sarah stayed with a friend for a few nights, terrified of what might happen next. But even there, she couldn't escape the story. Every time she opened her phone, new comments flooded in, some praising her courage, others accusing her of ruining a woman's life. The line between justice and vengeance blurred in the court of public opinion. Then a new article dropped, this time from Dana. She had dug deeper into the HOA's finances and uncovered what Sarah had only suspected. Marlene had been embezzling funds for years. The evidence was irrefutable. Unauthorized transfers, personal purchases charged to HOA accounts, and falsified receipts. The police officially launched a criminal investigation. Marlene was wanted for questioning. For a brief moment, Sarah felt vindicated. The truth had won. But beneath that relief was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones after too much fear, too much tension. That night, she returned home for the first time in days. The garage door had been cleaned, the graffiti gone, thanks to a few kind neighbors who still supported her. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. She checked the locks, turned on the porch light, and went to her desk to gather some documents for the police. But when she opened her laptop, she froze. Her desktop background had changed. It was no longer the photo of her niece she'd set weeks ago. Instead, the screen displayed a still frame from her own security footage, the same video that had exposed Marlene. Only this time, it wasn't Marlene in the image. It was Sarah, sitting at her desk, in her own home. The camera angle was different, one she didn't recognize. Someone had been recording her. Her hands trembled as she yanked the laptop shut. The realization hit her like ice. Whoever had broken into her cameras before hadn't just deleted files. They'd been watching her ever since. Panic rose in her throat as she checked every room, every outlet, every corner for hidden devices. She found one, a small black lens embedded in the ceiling vent near her living room. It was newer than the camera she'd bought, small and wireless. Someone had installed it recently. That was when she understood. Marlene wasn't acting alone. Maybe she never had been. The HOA had always been more than one person, and Sarah had just threatened everything they'd built. The thefts, the control, the money. It wasn't just Marlene's game. It was a system. And now, that system was fighting back. As Sarah called the police again, her voice shaking, she noticed movement outside her window, a figure slipping behind a tree, a flicker of silver under the moonlight. The silver SUV was back. Only this time, it wasn't driving away. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that carries too much meaning. Sarah crouched by her window, phone clutched tight in her trembling hand, watching the faint glint of the silver SUV parked just beyond the streetlight's reach. Its engine wasn't running, but she could feel the presence, someone inside, waiting, watching, the same way she had watched Marlene weeks ago through her cameras. Only this time, she was the one being hunted. The police dispatcher's voice crackled through the line, steady but distant. A patrol car was on its way, she said. Stay inside, lock the doors, keep the lights on. But those words felt fragile, meaningless against the weight of fear pressing down on Sarah's chest. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every shadow looked like a figure waiting to move. She backed away from the window and tried to breathe, tried to remind herself that help was coming. Yet she knew, deep down, that this was bigger than a simple trespasser. This was the endgame. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, the SUV was gone. They searched the street, canvassed the area, even checked nearby driveways, but there was nothing. Just empty roads and quiet houses with their blinds drawn tight. One of the officers, sympathetic but skeptical, suggested it was probably just a coincidence. But then Sarah showed them the hidden camera she had found, the tiny black lens embedded in her air vent. That changed everything. The officer's tone shifted, his posture stiffening. He collected it carefully, promised to send it for analysis. Still, he couldn't say who had planted it, or when. Sarah barely slept that night. Every sound felt amplified. The refrigerator hum, the wind tapping against the glass, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. By morning, her fear had hardened into resolve. She wasn't going to hide anymore. The next day, she went straight to the police station with Dana, the journalist who had broken the story. Together, they went through everything: the footage, the financial records, the threats, the break-ins, even the SUV sightings. The detective assigned to the case, a quiet man with gray at his temples, listened carefully and took notes. He told them what Sarah had feared but already suspected. The HOA wasn't just negligent, it was complicit. Financial forensics revealed that multiple board members had approved the falsified expenses. Funds had been siphoned through shell accounts linked to at least 3 different people. Marlene may have been the face of it, but she wasn't acting alone. The thefts, the fines, the intimidation. It had all been part of a system designed to exploit the residents while maintaining a facade of order. And now that system was collapsing. Within a week, the police had enough evidence for multiple arrests. Marlene was picked up first, found hiding at her sister's house 2 towns over. When they took her in, she was defiant, calm, even smug. But when her phone was searched, they found something that made Sarah's stomach drop: a list of residents' addresses, personal schedules, and private notes. At the top of the list was Sarah's name. Next to it, keep an eye on her. As news of the arrest spread, the remaining board members began turning on each other. Leonard, the secretary, claimed he'd been coerced into approving fraudulent documents. Another member fled the state before he could be questioned. It became clear that the HOA had been running like a small dictatorship, controlled through fear, lies, and intimidation. For the first time in years, residents began to speak freely. They told stories of unexplained fines, suspicious anonymous complaints, and packages that vanished without explanation. A few admitted they'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't dared to say anything. It was liberation and chaos all at once. The local media swarmed the neighborhood again. Satellite trucks parked along the main boulevard, reporters broadcasting live as the once pristine community became a cautionary tale. The HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance, white letters on a brick wall, was vandalized one night. Someone had spray painted over it in red, "Welcome to Willow Crook Estates." But for Sarah, the victory was bittersweet. The investigation confirmed that Marlene and the others had installed multiple hidden cameras in residents' homes and mail areas. They had used the footage to track deliveries, monitor movements, and even identify when homeowners were away, allowing them to intercept valuable packages without suspicion. It was an organized operation, a suburban surveillance ring disguised as a neighborhood watch. The night Sarah discovered she was being filmed hadn't been a random act of revenge. It had been cleanup. Someone trying to destroy evidence or scare her into silence. The detective called it a pattern of coercive control. Dana called it the story of the year. But Sarah just called it enough. After months of hearings, depositions, and media attention, the HOA was formally dissolved. The state appointed a financial trustee to manage what little remained of its accounts. The community voted to replace the board entirely, installing a temporary management company while new bylaws were written, this time with strict transparency rules. The changes were slow, but they were real. The fear that had once defined Willow Creek began to fade. People waved to each other again. Children played outside without being scolded for noise. It wasn't perfect, but it was finally human again. Still, the shadows of what had happened lingered. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would still wake to the sound of tires outside. She'd rush to the window, only to see nothing but darkness. The detective had assured her that all known associates of Marlene's were accounted for, that there was no ongoing threat. But trauma doesn't vanish with an arrest report. And then, one afternoon, months after it all ended, Sarah received a small, unmarked package on her porch. No return address, no postage, just her name written neatly across the top. Her heart raced as she carried it inside. She placed it on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no explanation. She plugged it into an old laptop, isolated from her network. The drive contained one file, video footage. She clicked play. The timestamp showed it had been recorded the night before Marlene's arrest. The camera angle was from somewhere high, maybe a streetlight or drone. It showed her house, her porch, her car, the surrounding street. Then, the silver SUV rolled into frame. The driver stepped out. It wasn't Marlene. It was Leonard, the HOA secretary, carrying a box that looked just like the one now sitting on her counter. He placed it down, looked straight into the camera, and smiled. Then he drove away. Sarah froze. The meaning was clear. Not everyone had been caught. Not every secret had been uncovered. Somewhere, someone was still watching. She ejected the drive, sealed it in a plastic bag, and called the detective again. As she waited for him to answer, she looked out the window at her quiet, sunlit street. Manicured lawns, friendly faces, and mailboxes standing neatly in a row. Willow Creek looked peaceful again. But Sarah knew better now. In neighborhoods like this, darkness didn't always come with noise or warning. Sometimes it smiled at you from across the street. Sometimes it hid behind HOA rules and friendly newsletters. And sometimes it waited until you let your guard down. End of chapter 6, story complete.